Yo, welcome back to your brand new video here on the second channel. Today we're actually be looking at the top 16 decks from the Kyoto Champions League this past weekend. Now, Japan, of course, does have a little bit of a different format than we do. They do have a couple cards early from Crown Zenith that we will be getting later on, and of course, they do have a different style of tournament. Their tournaments are like best of one, and their rounds are very short. Like 25-minute rounds basically makes it pretty hard for stuff like slower paced decks like Control to see play and do well in a best of one scenario. So their tournaments are a lot more different, and their format is also slightly different, and that kind of the best of one scenario also kind of plays into what people actually play to these tournaments. We're gonna kind of talk about that and break that down. If y'all want to see more Japan deck content here on the second channel, because Japan usually gets some pretty interesting decks to do well, and their format always being different, and we usually get to see stuff early from Japan that does well. And also, they do also play a lot of crazy rogue decks a lot of the time, where just some really wacky concepts come out of Japan and do well. And if y'all want to see that style of content where I look at the decks that do well in Japan, let me know by leaving a like on the video and leaving a comment down below if you do enjoy me looking at early decks in Japan. So starting things off here in the top 16, obviously the deck that won to a lot of surprise is actually Regi's. Now, Regi is still not a bad deck right now. It's actually doing okay. However, it's fallen off a little bit because it turns out that Lugia can beat it if they play Manaphy and Dunsparce. However, Dunsparce and Manaphy have been kind of on the downswing recently in Lugia, especially over here in on our side of the world. We do kind of see that Dunsparce starting to get cut for like Espeon VMAX and other useful cards to help in certain matchups like Eldegoss V and Birdkeeper. And that kind of lets Regi shine. Now, this Regi list is pretty, I would say, straightforward. We got the Trekking Shoe package over really any other cards. There's no Yellhorn. There is no bad Regi Lecky in the deck, I guess you can call it. There's no, like, bad Lecky. It's just actually 3 of the Evolving Skies Regi Lecky, which is kind of cool. The 120 damage is definitely good into Lugia, and also it's good to set up damage with the spread effect, doing 40 to 2 Pokemon. Good against Lost Zone. It can be good to set up math later on down the road, because this list actually plays a pretty heavy count of Gust. As you can see, it does play 3 copies of Serena, and a Boss's Order, and an Escape Rope. So obviously prioritizing a more heavier build of Gust in this deck, which I think is actually kind of fascinating, because it kind of means that Regi can get around walls like Ice Cube, Flying Pikachu. It also just means that you're more aggressive, which I kind of like. And I've always struggled with like Regi kind of having Gust, because like you want to play Research and Marnie. This deck actually plays 4 Research and 2 Marnie. The deck is a Marnie Path deck. As you can see, it does opt for the 4 copies of Path to Peak, which is just a good card. I mean, Path can like win you games because a lot of the time they can't get rid of it in time. It just kind of slows them down enough for you to win the game. And that's kind of what this list is prioritizing here, is the 4 copies of Path. No Pokestop cheese or anything like that. Just kind of going all in on Path and hoping that like Marnie Path or just Path can stick in general. Obviously good into Duraludon, which is another big deal. The one thing about this list is it's actually only playing the 2 Regigigas, not playing 3, meaning that Mew with Lost City could be a little bit more of a problem, because it's actually optimizing the 3 Regi Lecky, but not playing the Astral Radiance Regi Lecky, actually just playing 3 copies of the Evolving Skies Regi Lecky. I do like this list a lot. It's very much more aggressive with the heavy count of Serena and the Boss and the Escape Rope. I just don't know if I do like having the 3 Gigas, because I still feel like Mew is to be respected, but I guess with like the Mew Path Vacuum build being popular, Lost City is starting to decline in popularity, which may open up the doors for this to do well. So I really like this Regi list. This could maybe be an optimal Regi list going forward, depending on whether or not Ice Cube is seeing much play into Arlington. So it's awesome to see Regi win. I'm a Regi fan, and Regi doing well is pretty cool. In second place, to no one's surprise, obviously, though, is still Lugia V-Star. Lugia V-Star is still obviously a really good deck, no matter what. Now, you'll notice that Lugia V-Star is not seen play with Espeon in Japan, and the big reason for that is because Control is not as popular in Japan. And it's because, like, in the best of one 25-minute series, Control has a hard time winning a game, and that means that you don't really have to play Espeon. Now, you could still play it to stop, you know, the Evil Talls or the Paralysis shenanigans, but just kind of opting for a very straightforward Lugia build. It's basically just Towards build with, like, a couple different cards. The big one is the V-Guard Energy, which Lugia has been starting to squeak into their list now for, like, mirror matches and whatnot. So the V-Guard Energy definitely does provide a pretty cool tech card for the deck. Playing 3 Research, 2 Marnie. Pretty, like, straightforward Lugia list. Obviously, making second place is interesting. The cool thing about this is that this Lugia build had the Manaphy Dunsparce and got second, and Regi won. So I'm actually fascinated by that. I guess Path the Peak must have did a lot of work in that matchup, I would imagine. Next up, of course, we do have a very interesting deck. Eternatus VMAX got 3rd place. That is something that you don't usually see. That's got a lot of glare. I think there's another image. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Eternatus VMAX getting 3rd place is wild. Etern has not done well in a tournament in a very long time. It has fallen off from its grace quite a long time ago, but it's interesting that it's popping back up. Basically, I think the focal point of the deck is the Galarian Weezing, and then you just kind of have like your backup attackers with the Crobat VMAX and the Eternatus VMAX. More or less, it's basically a Galarian Weezing deck with Etern in it, more or less an Etern deck, but it is kind of cool to still see Etern do this well. Etern, obviously, still very hard to KO, 340 HP, and it's also able to one-shot mostly everything in the format when it fills its bench up. Using the Poison package with Sneasler, having a couple Goons in the deck is really good. The Goons do help Weezing Sneasler fix math against Lost Box. There's actually a lot of Weezing you will see kind of throughout this tournament. But yeah, Weezing was just really good in this deck, and it's actually really cool utilizing the Forest Seal Stone, the Boo Shake, playing 3 copies of Temple of Sinnoh and only 1 Hiding Dark, actually only playing 8 energy in total, which is kind of risky. I would still maybe like to see like 9 to 10 energy, but optimizing the Temple of Sinnoh is really smart into the Lugia matchup. It's got like big Paracel in the deck. No research either, kind of just straightforward. 4 Marnie, 2 Boss, 2 Serena, and 1 Roxanne. Not a single research in sight, which is really fascinating. This is a really interesting Eternatus VMAX Weezing list, but did well. Obviously, getting 3rd place is kind of insane, and Weezing could just win games by itself, and obviously the Eternatus VMAX is still pretty OP in this format when fighting doesn't see any play at all. Like, it's pretty hard to KO, and with like big Paracel, it's a little bit harder to deal with like Yveltal. And then in 4th place is actually going to be the Lost Zone Kyogre box deck, which is, again, no surprise that it did this well, since this deck actually is pretty good in our format. Now, this list is actually kind of interesting because it does have a couple different cards in it. The big one is kind of the Seal Stone. I forget what it's called. I think it's like Sky Seal Stone. Basically, when one of your basics knocks out one of your opponent's like Vs or whatever, you take like an extra prize or something. So if you're not gonna Mew VMAX, you're taking like 4 prizes or something like that, which is kind of insane. That's what that does, I'm pretty sure. And it is a pretty straightforward build. You got the Sableye, the Cram. Actually only playing 1 Sableye and 1 Kramer in each. Very interesting to see that. Still utilizing that late game Kyogre package with the Mirage Gates and the Recyclers and the Heavy Rods, which is really cool. And of course, playing the Zygarde. I'm pretty sure the Zygarde is like kind of there for like the Lightning matchups and Arceus and whatnot. So it's a nice little like counter attacker. I've actually seen Zygarde a couple times in some English lists of this from like Played Out Limitless, but hasn't seen play in like the top performing Lost Box Kyogre decks, and looks like it did well in Japan here. So really cool to see, kind of proving that like Lost Box Kyogre is maybe the best way to play this variant of this deck, because it definitely does have a lot of good things going for it. It's very, very hard to play, but can be very rewarding when it pops off. And it has a pretty good matchup spread. Like, I would imagine a deck like this would beat Etern if the Weezing wasn't in play. Like, if you're able to, like, rope around Weezing, this deck can probably beat Weezing with, like, Kyogre, and Sableye is really good. Obviously, Zygarde and Raikou can be pretty helpful into Etern. So, really cool that that got top 4. Getting in 5th place was actually going to be Mew VMAX. Very interesting build, actually, using Temple of Sinnoh and only 4 double turbo. You see what I mean? Like, Japan just, like, think outside the box, or they just do some pretty big brain things when they're building their decks. But yeah, this is the Vacuum Path build of Mew, but again, utilizing a Temple of Sinnoh, which is kind of mind-blowing, to be honest. I guess it is still useful into Lugia nonetheless, and even in other Mew matchups, it can be pretty good. But it's kind of crazy that it had a Temple of Sinnoh in it with only 4 DTEs, meaning that you're going to have to, like, double DTE to a Mew. There's not even a Silene in the deck. You only have 4 double turbo in total. But again, this build is a little bit more safer to play in a meta where, like, Yveltal doesn't see a lot of play, and with the Path Vacuum control build, you're able to mostly beat Lugia, as you're able to just have, like, a Path Stick, and then you're just able to, like, kind of apply a lot of pressure with Mew Technoblast, playing obviously the 4 Cross Switcher in the deck to like gust stuff. So pretty straightforward kind of control Lugia build, as people like to call it, and interesting that it got 5th place. I guess it makes sense it lost to Lost Box though, because Lost Box would probably beat the Mew deck. Now, another interesting one is another Lost Box deck getting 6th place. Now, this build is actually really unique, because it actually has a card that we don't have yet in the deck, and that is going to be the new Zamazenta. Now, this new Zamazenta is a really interesting card. We'll look at that in a minute, because it is basically just a Lost Box counter box deck. There's no Kyogre in the deck, utilizing Drapion, utilizing Raikou, utilizing Cram and Sableye, but again, playing the new Zam. Now, this is what the new Zamazenta does. Basically, it has an ability where it takes Sterilus damage from attacks, which can be pretty good against, like, Lost Box mirror matches. And it also has the attack Retaliate, doing 100 damage, and if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during their last turn, it does 120 more damage, meaning that you're going to do 220 damage with this Zamazenta. And that's actually pretty good. 220 damage is good damage. Of course, setting things up with Cramorant can be really good into the VMAX matchups. You can use it with Sableye. It can take out basic V Pokemon too, if there's one in the active spot. And of course, this deck also does play that new Seal Stone card in the deck. As you can see here, does play that one. So with the Drapion and Raikou, really good. And obviously, Drapion with that Stone into Mew is kind of insane. You're not going to Mew VMAX with Drapion. You're taking, I think, like 4 prizes or something, which is just mental. And then you kind of win the game by just going like Sableye on a Genesect V. This could honestly be the future of Lost Box in going forward when Crown Zenith comes out. The new Zam is a big partner that a lot of people have been playing in Lost Box, and there are other Lost Box decks in this list that actually did also play that new Zamazenta. And then, of course, we got Lugia Archeops. Once again, Lugia doing pretty well. No surprise to anybody. This Lugia list is actually really unique, though, because as you can see, it does play the amazing rare Kyogre, which is something that I've seen people discuss, but no one really ended up playing Kyogre. Now, this list doesn't play Dunsparce in it, but does play the Manaphy and only 3 Archeops, but does play other interesting cards like Burnett and a Path to the Peak. Could be pretty good in the mirror. Kind of like how Arceus plays Path with Starbirth Path. You can do kind of the same thing with Lugia, summoning Star Path. And the Kyogre is a really cool tech card. Again, if Manaphy's not seeing a lot of play, then the Kyogre can go off. But also, the Kyogre is really good in a Lost Box. So as you can see, this Lugia list doesn't play any Stoutland V in it, optimizing over the Kyogre, which I guess can be a little bit better in the Lost Box matchup. Kyogre does actually have enough HP to take a hit from a Cramorant, and that can sometimes be very relevant. So very cool to see a Lugia deck with a Kyogre in it do well. Something that we haven't seen yet in America is the Kyogre in the Lugia deck, but definitely something that people could experiment with in the future. And then we got another Lugia deck. This one might be also pretty straightforward if I can find the list. I think this is it. Yep, here we go. Another Lugia deck. This one does play the Raikou in it. A bit of glare there. It does also play Paracel and 2 copies of Path. So once again, trying to like get a Path to stick after doing Summoning Star. This list does play the Raikou. And again, Lugia decks are starting to cut like Dunsparce. Not Manaphy, but they're cutting Dunsparce from the deck. And this opens the gate for something like Raikou to do pretty well. Then, of course, another very crazy list. And see what I mean by Japan just coming up with wacky concepts? We got Lugia V-Star with Galarian Weezing in the deck. This is just a mind-blowing idea. The Weezing is good into Mirror, good into Lost Box. I guess that's the theory behind playing Weezing in Lugia. I've seen it all. Weezing in Lugia is just mental. Actually, kind of interesting. There's a couple new artworks for Stoutland and Lugia V-Star NV. But yeah, Weezing and Lugia. Again, Japan just comes up with the wackiest decks, and it ended up working for this player. They got 9th place, bubbled out of top 8, didn't get top 8, but still getting 9th place with a Lugia deck using Galarian Weezing is just mental. Now, I don't know how good this Weezing actually would be in Lugia. Like, if you were to play this deck in Arlington, would it be good? Honestly, I don't know. But it is a bit more of a lock Lugia deck. You do actually play 3 Path the Peak in the deck, and a Roxanne, and a bit heavier Marnie count than most Lugia lists play, actually optimizing only 1 research, not a single Serena in sight, so a bit more of a controlling Lugia deck. Very interesting concept. I don't know how good this actually is, but it is kind of cool in the mirror match and can be good against Lost Box and just any deck that can't deal with Weezing. I guess kind of the logic is just Weezing just can win you games. You don't even have to play Lugia. You can really just go Weezing the entire game and win, which is just fascinating. So just kind of mind-blowing to see a Lugia Weezing deck do well. And then Blissey Miltank did pretty decent. Blissey Miltank, once again, does kind of have a bit of control. It's one of the only, like, I guess, like, fast control decks. Japan actually really likes its Blissey, too, which is another big deal. Japan loves Blissey. This deck does play Heavy Eviltal, also plays Sydney in the deck and Yell's Cheer to control the energy, which is cool to see. So, yeah, Blissey with Eviltal and Miltank, pretty good deck. I still think it's actually not bad in our current format, in all honesty. It actually does have pretty decent matchups across the board, and it is kind of cool to see this, like, Eviltal Blissey build do pretty well in Japan. And again, Japan loves Blissey. They're kind of the ones that popularized the idea of Blissey. And then, of course, we have Mew VMAX. Another straightforward build using Lost City and Path the Peak combined. Just, again, very straightforward Mew deck there. And then, of course, another really interesting archetype is Arceus, Tapu Koko, Flying Pikachu VMAX. Now, Arceus is pretty good against a lot of the stuff that Japan was using. Again, you saw the Lugia, which the lightning package can handle. You also saw the Galarian Weezing. Arceus can do pretty good against Galarian Weezing too, and as you saw, there was a couple Weezing decks on this list that this deck can beat. Also, not a lot of decks respect the paralysis right now. As you saw, those previous decks we just looked at did not play Espeon in it at all, or they had a couple Paracells, but they didn't play Espeon, and that's fine for the Koko VMAX, and Paralysis is good. The 1/1 Pikachu with double Parasol is good. Actually, the crazy thing about this Arceus list is it actually plays 6 stadiums. We got 4 Path and 2 Temple of Sinnoh, just basically trying to hard counter the format. Pikachu Parasol is good against Lost Box. Koko is just a good attacker against most decks that can't handle Paralysis. And of course, Arceus can be good against Weezing. Very cool deck. Kind of a, I guess, like a quad variant, kind of optimizing it like Duraludon. As you see, there's no Bibarel, no Crobat, no Lumineon, just optimizing like 4 trekking shoes, very heavy counter supporters using Colress and Marnie and Research. Very cool list. Definitely want to experiment with this idea. Like, I think Arceus is still good in the format. It does struggle against Lugia, but this build can beat Lugia. I mean, with 6 different stadiums that can counter Lugia alongside the lightning package, I mean, bro, that could be pretty good, I ain't gonna lie. Next up is another Eternatus Weezing deck. Again, Eternatus Weezing seems pretty good in this format. This build does play the Drapion, no Crobat VMAX. This build also does play 2 Research instead of like the 4 Marnie, no Research package, but pretty similar to the other list we just looked at, except with a couple changes. 9 energy, still, you know, playing a little bit more energy, but yeah, Weezing Etern, pretty interesting archetype. Again, kind of more of a Weezing deck that kind of has the Etern in it for backup and can help in other matchups. Another Lugia Archeops deck doing well, to no one's surprise. Still a very good deck. This one looks to be a little bit, yeah, just kind of, yeah, vanilla deck, kind of looking like the other one we looked at before. Nothing too crazy there. Double Lumineon, though, looks like, so that's interesting. The double Lumineon package can be good. And then, of course, another wacky Mew build using Mew VMAX, but with a Radiant Jirachi, which is something that I don't think I've seen before. I know a few people I've talked to have actually used Jirachi themselves, but I don't know if it's like that good. But I guess it did well for this player, getting top 16 with this deck. Using the Lost City Path package alongside a Glimwood Tangle. So the Jirachi can be kind of cheesy. I guess can deal with those like big annoying walls that Mew can sometimes struggle against, and Jirachi can sometimes just take cheese knockouts. The other cool thing with Jirachi is if you're not going to lose your hand, you could actually Jirachi into like an insane hand and get like a bunch of power tabs. So I kind of like that idea. You can go Jirachi, sometimes get like a cheesy insta KO, and then your Jirachi gets KO'd, and you can actually get just like a bunch of tabs in your hand at once and just like blow a Pokemon up with Technoblast power tab. So really smart idea. That idea is actually really creative, and I love it. And as much as I hate Mew, Jirachi seems to be an interesting partner. No Meloetta, it's a double turbo build, but again, really cool concept. Being able to get 3 cards out of your deck can set you up for the turn where it's like, oh, you blow up my Jirachi? All right, I'm getting like a bunch of power tablets and a boss's order. I'm going to blow up whatever on the bench. I really like that idea. Very creative idea there. And then, of course, we got, once again, another Lost Box deck utilizing Zamazenta here. Again, basically the same list we looked at earlier, except this one has an Ice Cube in it. Again, this is kind of going to be what we might see for like Lost Box going forward when we do get Crown Zenith and when the new Zamazenta comes out. We might see something similar to this. Interestingly, none of these Lost Box decks played Snorlax in it, which is something that like I think a lot of people are thinking about. Like, I guess Snorlax replaces Zamazenta going forward. I'm not sure I agree with that idea, but it looks like Zam is seeing a lot of play in Japan. It's doing pretty well. Getting top 16 is a big deal. So we might have to just start seeing Zamazenta a lot more in our Lost Box decks going forward. And I am excited for that because Crown Zenith is a bit of a ways away, and I cannot wait for it to come out. But yeah, there you go. That is the top 16 in Kyoto. Once again, as you saw, they have a lot of creativity over in Japan. Japan loves their creative combos. Again, the Galarian Weezing deck's doing well. Weezing and Lugia, like what the heck? We got Radiant Jirachi and Mew. Just some wacky ideas, and I love it a lot. Of course, a pretty creative amount of decks did well. Decent, little cool Lost Box decks. We got the Etern decks doing well. Some interesting Lugia variants, and then of course the Arceus Koko Pika deck doing well alongside the Mew Jirachi build. Just some really cool ideas. Like, you just don't see this in America as much. Japan just is a very, they just love their creativity, and I love their creativity for that. And this is why I want to do more content talking about more Japan decks going forward on the second channel, because as you see, Japan has very cool concepts and very cool ideas, and I love talking about them. Obviously, as a rogue deck player myself, I love looking at stuff like this and talking about it, and seeing it do well is really cool. But yeah, that'll be it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video on the second channel. I should have an Arlington meta prediction video going out probably probably tomorrow for the Friday. Thanks for watching. Hope y'all enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you haven't already to the second channel. Leave a like on the video, and I will see you all later.